got so quiet. Welcome everyone. I'm Professor Barlow Dermagradician of the Armenian Studies program. I'd like to welcome you to this very interesting special event, and I call it a special event because a few months ago I got a call from Dean Shahinian in Virginia, and he talked to me about the idea of setting up a lecture series in Armenian art. And I was intrigued by that idea, and he wants to support here at Fresno State a continuing series of art lectures on Armenian art under the name of his late parents, Paul and Gloria Shahinian. I think I got that wrong, but I'll look it up again. And Grace and Paul Shahinian, and we're going to call it the Grace and Paul Shahinian Lecture Series. And I said, there's not going to be any better to bring as our inaugural speaker than our speaker tonight, Dr. Christina Maranci. So tonight we're going to listen to Professor Maranci speak about the topic of Armenian art, current directions and future goals. So I'll let her talk about that in a moment when she begins. Christina Maranci was born in Westport, Connecticut, so she is a diasporan Armenian. And she earned her bachelor's degree in art history at Vassar, and later a master's degree and a doctorate at Princeton in the Department of Art and Archaeology. And she was appointed as Mashtots Professor of Armenian Studies at Harvard in 2022. The Mashtots Chair is the oldest endowed chair in the United States. It was established in 1959, and the first holder of that chair was Dr. Robert Thompson. When he passed away, Dr. James Russell was appointed, and now Dr. Maranci is now the third holder of the chair in Armenian Studies, called after Mashtots Mashtots, the creator of the Armenian alphabet. Dr. Maranci's work explores the art and culture of Armenia in all its aspects, but with special emphasis on the late antique and medieval periods. And she is the author of 4 books and over 100 articles and essays on medieval art and architecture. And I want to bring to your attention the book that is the most recent book. It's her monograph on the art of Armenia. It's an overview of Armenian art in all periods and looking at all different types of art. And we do have books for sale after the lecture, so I'll invite you to come out afterwards and meet with Dr. Maranci. She'll be able to sign the book as well. It's a wonderful overview of Armenian art as an introduction, but also a very erudite book because she's brought in a lot of connections with Armenia's neighbors in the period, and really is a wonderful book. She's also written a book called Vigilant Powers, 3 Churches of Early Medieval Armenia, which won the Karen Gold Prize for Art History from the Medieval Academy of America, as well as the Sona Aronian Prize for Best Armenian Studies Monograph from the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. She is also co-founder of East of Byzantium, a workshop and lecture series designed to support graduate students working on the Christian East. And I'm happy to say that Dr. Maranci is the newly elected president of the Society for Armenian Studies, something that Professor Laporta and I have been involved with for most of our careers as the Society for Armenian Studies, which is sort of the international, not sort of, it is the international representative body for teacher scholars in the field of Armenian studies. So it's my pleasure tonight to welcome to Fresno and to have her give the inaugural lecture in this series, Dr. Christina Maranci. Dr. Maranci.
Thank you so much, Barlow. Thank you to Cal State Fresno, to the Armenian Center here, and I just want to, where's Sergio? Is he here? Oh, there he is, okay. Yeah, so I want to say how delighted I am to be here today in Fresno. It's such an important center for Armenian. I'm deeply intimidated that we have here in the audience one of the foremost Armenologists in the United States, if not the world, Sergio Laporta. So I will do my best not to make any mistakes, or at least Sergio don't, but I want to thank Dean Shahinian for creating this lecture series, and Barlow for his just endless good offices in terms of keeping Armenian studies going, and everything, Barlow, that you do for Armenian studies and for the Society of Armenian Studies. I can't thank you enough for what the support that you've given to the field, and thank you all for coming. So what I kind of, maybe you should have the lights down a bit so we can see the slides. So I'm going to talk about, this is a very generic title. I mean, I'm really just going to talk about a range of different things that I've been working on and thinking about. But hopefully it will sort of come together in some way by the end. But I wanted to start with just a little bit of the way Armenian art and Armenian architecture have figured in the news lately. And as you all have seen, particularly in the aftermath of and during the war of 2020, we really had the world had an immediate view of Armenian culture in the form of erasure. And this is ongoing, as you know, and it's one of the reasons for me that teaching this material is so vital and so important. And and so in a way, what I do is not just teach Armenian art history, but also advocate for the preservation of this culture. Because so much of Armenian culture, of course, exists outside the Republic and requires advocacy and awareness. So it might seem like years and years ago when we were all celebrating the show, the beautiful exhibition of Armenian art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That was actually in 2018. That was just 2 years before the war broke out. And at that time, it was just so exciting. I was not the only one to feel this way, but it was so exciting to see not just the amazing works of art in the galleries of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but the banner outside. And all of us who went had our pictures taken with the banner, and it was a big deal on social media. It was really, though, more than just a kind of a selfie moment. It was, for a lot of us, it was a feeling like Armenian art had finally arrived. Here we have this banner on the solemn intercolumniations of a McKim Mead and White building, one of like kind of icon of arts institutions, and here was Armenia. So this was a great chance for all of us to celebrate in 2018. And in the galleries, you could see objects like some of these, from manuscripts to reliquaries, ceramics, metalwork, stone steles. And yeah, it was just a really wonderful moment. And I loved not only seeing these objects, some of which, for me, it was the first time seeing them in the flesh, but I liked watching people watching them, because you could really get a sense of this tremendous excitement that everyone felt looking at these objects, and really, feeling a part of something larger. That show, which was curated by Helen Evans, who's the curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, very much stressed how connected Armenia was to other cultures, whether it was Iran, or whether it was South Asia, or whether it was Europe. And that is a kind of theme that has really taken over in art history. There's a lot of discussion about what is global art. And here are just a few of the kinds of projects of connected art or global art in which Armenia has played a role. And I would say that what I've noticed as a historian of Armenian art is that with this global turn, where people understand that art history is more than just about Renaissance Italy or about medieval cathedrals, that we understand there's a bigger world out there. And that's been something wonderful for me, because it's meant that people are interested in Armenia in a way that they really weren't before. And just to be kind of personal about this, when I was a grad student in the 90s, I was actually told, just take the word Armenia off your resume, because nobody cares. It's like it's nowhere. And how far we've come, where Armenia is now part of this global history of art and celebrated for that. So I think that that's important for us to recognize. And this is something that, again, is really only taken place in the past, couple of decades, if I'm going to be generous. But how new is it? I think we can think maybe with a historian like Ananya Shirakatsi, geographer and historian of the 7th century. I think if he, went to that Met exhibit, he probably would be like, yeah, well, what's the big deal? We all know that Armenia is, the center, if not the center of the world, then the summit of the world. And I'm just giving you a little bit of a text from him. This is from Houston's translation of the Ashkaratsuits. And so here I'm attributing the Ashkaratsuits to Ananya Shirakatsi. Sergio, I'm looking at you. Sorry, I won't do this throughout the lecture. But Ananya says, Upper Armenia is the highest region, not only of Armenia, but of the whole world. And this is why it is called the summit of the earth. It issues waters to the 4 corners of the earth, giving rise to 4 very powerful rivers, the Euphrates to the west, the Arax to the east, the Gail to the south, and the Akamsis, i.e. the Vol, to the north. It has 3 large mountains. It has among its animals the stag, the goat, the wild sheep, deer and pig, among wild fowl, the partridge, the bustard, stork, etc. It also has hot springs and salt deposits and all the abundance of the earth. So I think Ananya would have been pleased with the show. He may have actually skipped the show entirely and gone to the Greek and Roman galleries, we can't say. But I think we can say that in the long run of Armenian art and literature and culture, that it has, there's this sense of Armenia as a kind of vital place, at least within its own historiographic tradition. I've always thought of Armenia as connected, as a culture that's connected to other cultures, and this comes up in various ways in my own work. One of the things I work on right now, I've been working on this church for a long time, is Ani Cathedral, which in the olden days, way back in the 19th century, scholars were already comparing it to European Gothic. And this was put forth in very kind of thorough ways and problematic ways by a scholar named Josef Straskovsky in 1918. You can see why anybody really who knows Gothic would think about Ani Cathedral's interior as connected to Gothic, pointed arches, clustered columns, this kind of soaring space. But in absence of, I should say this isn't something that's really been pursued in the scholarship since Straskovsky, but even if we turn away from this idea of Europe as a kind of dissemination point for Armenian ideas, we can still think about how Ani Cathedral is connected to other cultures like Byzantium. And I've discussed in the past and we know this from the source I gave you here, that the architect of Ani Cathedral was also involved in the reconstruction of the dome of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and this is well known. I'm not probably telling you anything you didn't know. But what's interesting here is looking precisely at the parts of the dome that Turdat, the architect, did kind of address. And we know it was this particular area, the Great Western Arch of the dome that he was involved with. So Turdat is one of these fascinating characters who worked both in Constantinople and in Armenia, and we have his work from both Hagia Sophia and from Ani and its environs. So that's just something I'm working on now. Ani Cathedral, even in the inscription though, we can find ways in which, this is the foundation inscription of Ani Cathedral, we can find ways in which this building connects to other places. So in the very beginning of this inscription is a calendar, and it's telling you that this was made was founded in the year of the Romans, in the year of the Armenians, in the year of the Romans, and possibly also a Hijri date, an Islamic date. And so in this way, it kind of positions Ani Cathedral in this much larger world, which isn't just about Armenia, but about the Byzantines and about the cultures to the south and east. So I think if we read the monuments carefully and we look carefully, we can see how connected they are to the broader world. And this, I think, getting back to the title of my lecture, I think this is I think an important future goal and current direction that the field is taking. Just on a kind of another note, I'm just showing this beautiful this is a capital, a kind of a little capital on the cathedral. Photo I took in August. Right now, the church is under scaffolding, and it is being conserved through the work of World Monuments Fund. It means for a lot of us who are like, we just want nice pictures, there's nothing more annoying than when you go there and the thing is in scaffolding. But what it did, so at first I was like, oh great. But then what it means sometimes, if you're lucky, is that you can climb the scaffolding and take really close-up pictures, which is just amazing. So I was able to get up to the upper levels and take pictures, and like this one. And actually, what's so interesting, I would say this is a future goal, is that the entire church, let me just go back for a minute to it, is covered in incisions that you cannot see with the naked eye. You certainly can't see, well, you can see it with the naked eye, but you can't see it when you're on the ground. And these are incisions, they're geometric forms, circles, different kinds of things that, one bit of this I knew about, but I was with somebody who works at the site, who showed me that this is all over the church. And I think these aren't graffiti, these incisions, but I think they're used in the design process for things like, let me find it again, this wonderful capital. So I think what the Masons were doing was actually working out some of these design problems on the church up high where you can't see from below unless you're on scaffolding. So to be continued. In the meantime, let's go to Kilikia, and here you have a map. So we're moving now into one of the sort of great periods of Armenian manuscript, right? So we're going into the mountainous shores of Cilicia or Kilikia, where we have a kingdom between 1199 and 1375, and we have this great manuscript tradition that you probably are familiar with, but who can get enough of these amazing images. This is a headpiece from the lectionary of Hatum II. This is the same manuscript that's on the cover of my book. So there you have it. This is obviously one of my favorite pictures. It's one of my favorite pictures, not just because it's sumptuous and it's colorful and vibrant, but because specifically of those weird creatures that you see populating it. So you have Christ Emmanuel, or a young Christ, unbearded Christ, in a medallion, and he's surrounded by these strange creatures that seem to be coming out of maybe Chinese ceramics or textiles. This is not the only such image, and actually, I should say at this point that, of course, a previous holder of the Hagen Isabel Berberian chair, the great Dikran Krumjan, wrote about this manuscript, and identified quite rightly the motifs that can be connected to Chinese ceramics. And let me just go forward. So some things like these wonderful lions or the phoenixes you have here can connect very well to the creatures. Do you all see like the blue, yeah, and these guys? So, what Dikran Krumjan really first showed, and has continued to show in his articles, is this really interesting connection between Armenian art and this East Asian world, made possible through Mongol connections, through the Mongol Empire. I think this is fabulous, and I've enjoyed reading his work and talking to him about it. I think there's no question. In fact, at the Met Show, there was a wonderful kind of, there was a corner of one of the galleries had this manuscript, this is a detail of this one. It's a detail, this one, but it had, in the Met, they also had a dragon, silk, a Chinese silk with a dragon on it, so to make very clear sort of the idea that you have these portable objects that would have been, possible resources for painters painting the Cilician manuscripts. So this gives you a sense of how cosmopolitan Cilician art can be, and gives you a sense of how kind of probably elite taste, right, that for this kind of thing. But we need to do more, and this is just the beginning. So I want to take you on a journey as we look at this beautiful manuscript, and not just look at it, but also read it. So here we have a detail of the page, and what we see if we read this is that it is the readings for the 6th of April, the Feast of the Annunciation. And if you look at this bit right here, it refers to Gabriel when he said to her, to the Virgin, "Be joyful, rejoice." And there I have it, made it very clear for you. So that's what we're looking at. This helps us understand, perhaps, if we go further, why we see what we see. If we go a little farther down, we'll see that the first reading is from Psalm 67, 68, concerning the victory of God over the enemies of his people. Okay, so like that. Yes, Psalm 67, victory of God concerning the enemies of his people. And so the manuscript contains a partial refrain of the verse, "The Lord gave word." Der dat says, where is it? There it is, yeah. And although the manuscript omits it, the verse continues. They proclaim, opening its jaws and lashing its tongue as though it had not quite finished repeating the divine word it had received. So I kind of like that. And then also concerning the dragon, I'm going forward. These are some more lines that are in the Psalms. "May they diminish like smoke diminishes as wax melts before the fire." And again, we can think about this in relation to the fire-breathing dragon. So we need to do, I think, again, more than just like look and identify motifs. It's important to do the work of the word-image relationships that emerge. And then if we go forward with the psalm, if we think about the psalm, for those who knew it, it would recall themes of foreign submission, like in verse 19. "And you ascended the heights, you captured captivity, you took the plunder, shared the gifts, and gave them to the sons of man, even to the unbelievers, so that you might reside among them." And the word for gifts here is literally patarak. So it is offerings, just as is used for the gifts of the Magi, which is it. So it's not pargav, but patarak. So there's something interesting here that connects this to the Magi and connects it also to the divine liturgy. Verses 31 to 32. Here the psalmist specifies those paying homage to God. Envoys will come from Egypt or India, Indik, and India shall reach its hands to God. Kingdoms of the earth praise God and sing psalms to God. Noteworthy here is the term used for envoys. It's shreshta, or angel, in its primary meaning. So again, we might think here about the adoration of the Magi, which, if you think about the fact that this is all being read for the Feast of the Annunciation, is quite kind of appropriate. Psalm 67 abounds in animal themes, including the beast among the reeds, the assembly of bulls, and the ranks of cattle, which makes me think about those cows on the left side there. And my favorite is verse 24. "Just as your feet will bathe in blood, so will the tongues of your dogs bathe in the blood of your enemies." And here, if you look carefully, there are actually tongues that these creatures have. Can you see? Their little tongues are sticking out. It's very clear with this guy. Well, I think so. And I think with there too. Trust me on this. And then if we go further, the left-hand text column is from Proverbs. So right up here. Is that showing? Yeah. Proverbs 11:30 to 12:4, mentioning, among other things, trees, fruits, and roots. The phrase, it starts with the phrase, "The fruit of the righteous is the tree of life." And so again, this is really lovely when we think about the floriated vegetal world that the artist has created. continuing on, after Proverbs, and on the right-hand text here, we get the prophecy of Zechariah. And this kind of continues some of those themes of like the captives that we hear about in Psalm 67. So sing and rejoice, daughter of Zion, for behold, I will come and dwell in your midst, says the Lord. Many nations shall take refuge in the Lord on that day, and shall be his people. And you can see this here, maybe on the next page. Oops, down here. Many nations. Let me just go back for a minute. So many nations shall take refuge in the Lord on that day, and shall be his people, and will dwell in your midst. And you shall know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. So, if we go back to this image, we can think about how those wonderful dragons and the lions, those creatures that surround Christ, we can think of them not just as, sort of examples or expressions of a kind of elite cosmopolitan, like I'm a king and look at all my fancy stuff. We can also think about it very directly as a response and an engagement with the scriptural text. So I think that only kind of gives power to this image. And just thinking about, for example, the way those creatures are kind of framing Christ, they're approaching Christ, is really, I think, a powerful way of visualizing the envoys, right, that come and approach, who are in the midst of God. I think that this work and so many Armenian manuscripts offer a chance to do work between the images and the words, and I'd say that more and more scholars are starting to do that work. I would say in the United States, of course, the great Sira Peter Nersessian, along with Dikran Kumjan, really, they were the pioneers in the study of iconography and style and manuscripts in general. And the task, I think, should be taken up now by these future generations. I guess I'm one of them, but then after me, to think more about these kinds of relationships across text and image, and revisit some of these wonderful manuscripts that we've only really appreciated for their imagery. Okay, so now I want to take you to Europe. We're going to go to Europe. You might ask, why are we going to go to Europe? But I want to talk about not just Armenian monuments and manuscripts. I want to talk about Armenian pilgrims to Europe. So not only how Armenian art is connected to other places, but how Armenian pilgrims were connected to other places, or Armenian travelers. What we can find when we look at texts like this one is that Armenian texts, medieval texts, shed light on other artistic cultures, including those vaunted medieval cultures of Europe. So I'm going to, and one example that we could talk about is Holsep, who was a 7th century pilgrim to the Holy Land, who is fascinating because he actually measured the relationship between the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, the Christ tomb, and the rotunda. He understood and says that this was offset in the structure, so the tomb was not directly in the center, but offset, which is like golden information if you're a historian of medieval architecture. Or we could think about Simeon Lehatzi, Simeon of Poland, who almost a millennium later is writing about passion plays in Rome and how wires were used to sort of construct, to create scenery. I just want to show you this character, whose name is Martyros, from Erzincan, modern-day Erzincan. This is a French translation I'm showing you here. There's no critical edition yet of the manuscript of the text, but this translation was made in 1827 based on, I think, one manuscript in Paris. These are some of the places that Martyros went in the 1490s. He lived in the second half of the 15th century. He traveled across Europe between 1489 and 1496. And he described himself as a bishop of Erzincan, and he arrived in Constantinople, boarded a ship on 11 July 1490, and then traveled from there to Venice, Rome, Switzerland, throughout Germany, Flanders, France, Spain, down to Gibraltar, and then back to Italy, where he was in Rome for the Great Lent of 1496. And so he has accounts of famous sites that you will know. So he goes to San Marco, and he has accounts of all these places, sort of telling us in first person, what these places are like. So he says that on October 1st, we came to the city of Venège, which is Venedig, great and glorious city, and which is built in the middle of the sea. And he likes to tell you how many, he counts houses. There must be some kind of good app for that, I don't know. He has 74,000, it has 74,000 houses. It is an extremely glorious and rich city. And there's a large church in the middle of the city, which 10,000 men could stand inside, and exceedingly decorated with gold, the Church of St. Mark the Evangelist. And there are 2 organs inside, and 2 winged lions made of gold inside. I mean, this is, again, I think if you were a specialist on San Marco, this kind of knowledge of the contents of San Marco at a particular point in time, in this case in 1490 or so, is just, again, this is precious information. And there are many other churches in the city, all of them built in the water, and there's a large maidan, so he's using here Persian or Arab, is it Persian, Arabic, Turkish? Anyway, it's not an Armenian, and it's not piazza, right? It is using for the square in front of the Church of St. Mark. He tells us about the horses. So above the doors, very high up, were 4 yellow carved bronze horses appearing very large, and each one standing with one leg lifted up. This is helpful because we know then, okay, he's trustworthy in this way. They certainly look that way. He has visits with the Pope. And after 13 days, we arrived in Ancona, and 30 days thence, with the greatness of God's protection, we arrived in Rome, where were the holy and glorious, all praiseworthy, saintly bodies of the chief apostles Peter and Paul. And we went and worshipped and pleaded for the remission of our sins and for those of our parents and our benefactors. We lived there in Rome 5 months, and we saw all the principal sites. And 3 times, Martyros tells us, I was introduced to the Pope, who received me with exceeding love and solemnity, and gave me a letter. All would be astonished at what he gave and how he spoke with me. And I think it's this Pope in particular, Pope Alexander VI. So he talks about, again, landmarks, so we get a sense of the kind of landscape of Rome at this time. So he talks about the Filarete doors, as they're called. And so he's visiting St. Peter's. Okay, this is before Bernini, of course. He notes the cast metal doors, upon which one leaf was Paul and one was Peter. So we can be pretty sure he's talking about the Filarete door, which was only made in 1445 to 48, so fairly new construction at that time. He visited Nero's Golden House, which had been discovered only a few years before his arrival. He goes to Aachen, and he visits the Marian shrine, Santa Maria Dax, he calls it, Santa Maria Tax, where is found the all-holy and glorious cloak of the Holy Mother of God. So he was looking specifically for holy sites, for relics, for sacred things. He spends a lot of time talking about Cologne, and he tells us again how many houses there were and stuff about the city. He is very interested in the Magi, in the tomb of the Magi, of the 3 kings, and he tells us here that the heads of the three are placed on top of the tomb. So here, presumably, he's looking at the reliquary. And he makes a really interesting side route to a church that he says is very beautiful, with the bodies of 20 holy virgins placed in a case. And so it's pretty sure here that he's referring to a church of St. Ursula in Cologne, which you see an image of here. I could go on and on. One particularly interesting thing is when he goes to, he's at the cathedral and he asks the priests, how much would this sculpture cost? And they tell him, they give him this amount. And he's describing the jewels and the colors, and it's not clear. I mean, 215,000 florins is a lot of money, so it's not clear whether this was a kind of joke or someone was trying to pull up, I don't know, have a little fun with him. But we get this kind of information, which is just fascinating. And then the other thing that he does is he goes to Notre Dame in Paris. He also goes to Saint Denis and other sites, and he tells us that, and this is really interesting because, of course, this is before the Reformation. It's before the changes to the facade, which was, we know, restored. But he tells us here that there were 28 kings shown with crowns on their heads. So this refers to the royal gallery of kings that you see on the west facade. And above is the Mother of God, the holy God-bearer, ornamented with gold in various colors, with, standing on the left and right, the holy archangels in her service. So he's looking carefully at everything he's seeing, he's recording what he's seeing, and he's telling us about these things. And things like where he says, like, they stand like humans, all of them, gives you perhaps a sense of a particular Armenian perspective, where we don't have a tremendous amount of sculpture in the round in an Armenian context. So we have mostly relief sculpture. So this might have seemed very jarring to him and something noteworthy for discussion. So what I'm trying to propose, I guess, is that we can, not only is Armenian art important as part of this global and connected world, but Armenian text can tell us something about medieval Europe and give us a new perspective on these structures that you would think, well, we know all there is to know, right, about Notre Dame. But what I'm saying is, actually, what Martyros can tell us is very precious. Again, because it predates so many of the changes at the site, and it's not received any attention from scholars of medieval French architecture. So I want to now go elsewhere, and I want to move forward in time. So I want to take you to Kütahya, among other places. So a famous artisanal center, famous region. It's about 200 kilometers southeast of Constantinople. So it was a center for ceramics manufacture in the Ottoman period, with production peaking in the early 18th century. And it was this time when tiles were made for the decoration of churches, as well as mosques and tombs throughout the empire, and for the Ottoman court. So scholars link Kütahya ceramic technique and decoration to a wide range of traditions from Europe to South Asia. And what this means is that, for Armenians who were directly involved in this ceramic production, it means that they were also involved, because of the Armenian merchant network, they were involved in this much larger kind of network of artistic ideas. So here you have a really extraordinary ceramic from the Victoria and Albert Museum showing the Archangel Michael, but there's also this weird face in the torso, which you probably are noticing. But I don't want to talk about that one. I want to talk about a set of tiles that are found in the Cathedral of St. James in the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem. These tiles, and there you have the Armenian quarter, and there's the interior of St. James. The tiles that I'm going to talk about were originally intended for an ambitious repair to the Holy Sepulchre in 1719, and this was to be a joint effort among the Armenians, the Greeks, and the Latin Church, and it never happened for reasons that are not clear. But between 1727 and 1737, the tiles were instead used to renovate what is known as the Etchmiadzin Chapel, which was south of the main church of St. James, so attached to it. And this is what they look like now when you go. So they're kind of set up in a vertical row here, but they have been over time, they've been moved from their original positions. There are 45 of these tiles in total, of which 27 bear a continuous inscription running below scenes that mostly depict the New Testament. The inscription is not complete, and the tiles are now Let me just say tiles. The tiles are now placed in various locations in the chapel. So it's when you go now, you won't see them in their the way they were meant to be seen. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the inscriptions. So here you have a scene of the resurrection of Christ, and he is there, above clouds, presumably Holy Sepulchre, and guards or executioners. And it says Sur Paritune above, so Holy Resurrection. But down below you have part of this continuous inscription. It's kind of a chronicle, and it's telling you that in this year there occurred in the city of Istanbul, it says. And then on another one of these tiles, it says at the top, it refers to the oil-bearing women, and then below it says an earthquake and fire, which was burned also. And so you have at the same time this kind of these events in the Gospels, but you also have this running kind of chronicle. And Charles Dowsett was the one who sort of deciphered the chronicle and sort of put it together and tried to figure out sort of what order these tiles went in. But you have here this, but sometimes the kind of the relationship between the biblical story and the inscription becomes very potent. So here you have the first martyr, and you see St. Stephen being stoned here. He's in the center. And then below, it says, the chronicle says, the sheikh killed and cut off their heads. So you get this kind of parallel, kind of torture, martyrdom. If we start putting these together, you can see how there's this kind of, kind of double narrative that can be derived. But what's interesting here is not just the combination of narratives that are biblical and are historical, but it's also that you have here tiles that are made in Kütahya that were made for the Holy Sepulchre, that ended up in the Cathedral of St. James, and that actually in their iconography are connected to European print and going the other way to South Asia in terms of textile design. So there's this tremendous worldliness that we can see in them that needs to be studied. And I think maybe a bigger point here to be made is that ceramics need this kind of study. They're one of the lost children of Armenian art, like textiles, that just haven't received the kind of attention that, let's say, manuscripts and monuments have. I wanted to take a little bit of time, I have some time, to talk a little bit about Armenian art in the United States, and actually we're going to go a little bit elsewhere too. We'll go to Switzerland briefly, like Marta was. But this is actually a page from an Armenian manuscript in Houghton Library at Harvard, and it's on like the back page of a beautiful canon table. So nothing you might really pay attention to, but I actually like these kinds of little doodles and find them not just amusing, but actually kind of interesting and worthy of study. Another thing that I mentioned textiles, and I wanted to show you this really fascinating textile in the Armenian Museum in Watertown, which also hasn't received any study. I'm giving you these as, like, obviously just examples whole, corpora of materials that need study in this country. Collections, private collections, university collections, museums. I mean, this is the Armenian Museum, but this has never really been, it's never received formal study. We don't know if it was made in Iran or India, for example. We don't know the date of it, but it's an extraordinary textile for its iconography. So if we look at this, and if we know, like from the point of view of studying Christian art and Christian iconography, this is very strange. We have Christ turned in 3/4 or profile in what appears to be a Last Judgment scene, which already is strange. And then you have this very, very, this really nightmare-inducing devilish figure with bushy eyebrows who's holding a soul, clearly a damned soul. Other strange things. There's a hookah smoker at the bottom. So that also is unusual. And I, for a while, thought, well, this furniture looks sort of Deccan, so maybe this is India. I don't know. I have a seminar next term on textiles, and we'll study this. And when I showed it to the grad students in art history at Harvard, they were fascinated because a lot of them work on Islamic art or South Asian art, and they'd never seen anything like this. And it was also interesting from the point of view of manufacture. So this uses a resist dye technique where you place this kind of waxy stuff on a textile, and then you dip the textile in the color, and you do this several times to get the patterns you want. But it's also block printed, and you can probably see these sort of repeating motifs of the circles, and they do repeat. So it's using different kinds of techniques, and this can be studied from a kind of forensic perspective. It can be very interesting. And then there's this, which is at the center of the textile, and it is a figure that doesn't look like a biblical figure. I don't know who it is, but you'll see there's an Armenian inscription there. And my contention, and I'm willing to be, to entertain other options, but I like my idea best, is this says Brayutun, and then this looks like, to me, it says, and I've examined this pretty carefully in the flesh, Mahomet, which would mean this is something like testimony, Muhammad, something like that. And then you have his hand seal here. So, this is ongoing work, and it raises one possible interpretation, which is that this is something that I've thought about, and a student of mine has written about, that this refers to a covenant that Armenians in the 7th century made according to a literary tradition, a covenant with the Prophet Muhammad, that was that no matter what happened, that he would keep safe the Armenian and the Christian and the Armenian churches in the Holy Land. And so it was referred to as the covenant of the prophet, and it, whether or not it's true, it's hard to say, but it's a tradition that continued and lived on in textual tradition. And I think there's maybe an early version of it in Jerusalem, but I don't know for sure. But it's been published and discussed. But if that's the case, then that's an interesting way of thinking about this, is potentially something we could think, for example, of an Armenian community in Madras, what was Madras, or in Iran, making such an object, perhaps intending it, because there were important Armenian textile centers in Madras. Maybe it was sent to the Holy Sepulchre with that reminder of the care that should be taken with the Armenian churches. It's just a possibility, but this is an extraordinary textile, and here it is in an exhibition I held a year ago it's an extraordinary textile that just hasn't received any attention and sort of doesn't fit in any nice, neat category of iconography, or so it's been pretty much ignored. Another really interesting textile at Harvard is this chalice, this veil, a chalice veil for a church in Arakir, and with a wonderful inscription. And if you go to the website, the Harvard website, it's backwards, so you might not immediately read it, but just you flip it and there it is. And it's wonderful, and it does all those things that Armenian commemorative inscriptions do. It names who this was made for, and in memory of all these different people. This is what I started with. This is a fascinating object. This is how it appears on the Harvard website: liturgical vestment fragment, and I've never seen anything like this. It's a scene of Christ, yes, Christ with the living creatures, the ox, the eagle, the man, and the bull, and a cross, but over and over again. I mean, not only is that unconventional from an iconographic point of view, theologically it just seems bizarre to see Christ so many times. And then there's this strange inscription at the bottom, which seems to read, I think, Tavagan over and over again. So Tavagan in the year. That's what I'm getting out of this. I've not seen this yet in person. I've made an appointment to see it. So I guess when I think of future goals, and it's really to do the work of going into all the archives in this country, because we might be able to create not a different image of Armenian art, but a much richer one. And I think that remains to be done. And just maybe I'll end with one more thing that, again, this is taken, really interesting object that it looks sort of, I don't know what it looks like, but it was put up for auction at Sotheby's in, I don't know, several years ago. And it was described this way as a passionnal. It's a miscellany, it's a jouvovat. And it's in Armenian, yes. It's given a place of production as the Sot Monastery, but it really should say Surp Monastery in the colophon. It's just the holy monastery. And it's not 1535, it's 1335. So there are some, this is where there were some, and it's by Sarkis Pitzak. So it's an extraordinary, an expensive mistake to make on the part of Sotheby's, because when they sold it as a 16th century manuscript by an artist whose name was Sarkis Lutseal, but it was Sarkis full of sin. That's the way Sarkis Pitzak, we know for a lot of reasons that it is in fact Sarkis Pitzak, but that's one of the, and here's some of the marginal images which immediately tell you this is Sarkis Pitzak. But the thing I want to end on, which I think really breaks all the rules of Armenian art, is that we have this idea of, this manuscript, you'll notice, was covered in a plaque, an ivory plaque. And this is an extraordinary thing. So you'll hear the usual chapter and verse is that Armenians didn't really have much of an ivory carving tradition, at least for the medieval period, and generally you'll hear that the only ivory that survives or is known is this Echmiadzin and Gospels cover on the left. So this one, which is Byzantine anyway. But if I'm right, and this is on the right, a carving that is Armenian, and I think it is because iconographically we can connect it to a particular moment in the imagery of the transfiguration of Christ. And you see Christ like in the center with Moses and Elijah on either side, and then this weird ledge, it's like the apostles below are just like kind of in this cubby hole below. It's very strange iconography. It doesn't appear regularly, like here's Toros Roslin, where you see they're just, it's a mountain, they're on a mountain, and here at this ledge. This is something really strange that happens in the first half of the 14th century. And so if that's the case, we have a completely anomalous thing, and that is an Armenian ivory carving from the medieval period. So all of this, I guess, is work to be done. It's the work really of kind of just snooping around and looking at you know, auction websites and looking in, you know, storage in museums and reading the text along with the images, and I think we're going to only continue to build on what Professor Dikran has done in the past in the study of Armenian art. I think it involves, the best work in this involves both doing the really traditional work that was set out by people like Sirabina Nersesyan, trying to aspire to the philological work that your professor Sergio Laporta, the kind of work that he can do and does, and then doing the archaeological work of going and looking at all these places and objects, and really that's the way I think forward with the field. It's all in front of us. There's just so much that's been made and written, and so that's, I think, that's just sort of some thoughts. Okay, I think that's all I have.